Welcome back to the Board of County Commissioners Policy Session for June 15th, 2021. Gary, who's up next?
Thank you, Chair. First, you do have a quorum. Commissioner Savas is online, and Commissioner Shull and Chair Smith are in the hearing room, so that is 3 of you. The first session is Annual Review of Clackamas County Solid Waste Collection Fees. We have our staff from Transportation and Development, Sustainability and Solid Waste Program, Dan Johnson, the Director of the Department, Edmund Polk, and Rick Wintenhalter from the Sustainability Division. So whoever's starting, please go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. Glad to be back this afternoon, Commission. We're here today to present the annual review of the Clackamas County Solid Waste Collection Fees. As you can imagine, as you read through the packet, it's a very technical topic. And we have provided a PowerPoint that we're going to walk you through this step by step to make it a little bit easier and answer any questions you might have. A couple points before we begin. Just as we've shared with you previously, there's kind of a 3-step process to waste. And so essentially there's the collection, there's the transfer, and there's the disposal or the tipping fee. As we discussed, while our rates cover costs from all 3 of these disciplines, costs are, some costs, for example, the disposal costs, are set by other entities. A discussion you've had here previously with a dialogue with Metro. An action that's already taken place and has already been done and implemented by that entity. We are keenly aware of the BCC's concern about this and any future increases, and we are developing a plan to ensure the BCC is apprised of any future rate increases, and we involve you in those discussions. Some second point of clarity, I want to emphasize the fact that this is a scalable service. And so you have the choice as the end user to scale up or down on what kind of service you would like to see. You could scale to a full scope of services all the way down to the fact you want to do your own self-haul for your garbage and recycling needs. Let's see here. Lastly, these rate assessments have been vetted through the Solid Waste Commission. They take in all the cost factors that we're going to share with you today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Edmund Polk and Rick Winterhalter with our Sustainability and Solid Waste Program to take it over. I think Rick's going to take the lead, and so we'll dive into the PowerPoint now, please.
Hello, Commissioners. Rick Winterhalter with Sustainability, and with us today is Beth Vargas Duncan. She's the Executive Director of the Clackamas County Refuse and Recycling Association, representing our franchisees in the county as well as the other franchisees within our region for the Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association. So as Dan, Mr. Johnson indicated, we do an annual review of our companies. And next slide, please. We have 8 parent companies that are kind of a mix of publicly held companies and private companies, and a couple of those hold more than one franchise in the county, which is an area that they serve. And so in addition, so we do an annual review of pretty intense review of their finances, and we have help from a third-party CPA, Bell and Associates, to go through that. Next slide, please. And just kind of, we're going to give a little bit of an overview of the system. It's roughly about $50 million system overall. We serve, we have the county divided into 3 fee zones, urban, rural, and distant rural. And you can see by the graph that the urban area brings in the most revenue, combination of commercial and, well, we can get to the next slide. So the system revenue, the distribution of that revenue is residential being the largest part of the entire system. It's about a 50-50 split in the rural area between residential and CART and commercial. So about a third or a little less than a third is commercial container service, which you see at restaurants and those types of businesses, and then the larger drop boxes that you'll see at grocery stores, compactors, and that sort of thing. So that's the smaller, about the 20%. So one of the things too, so next slide, please. In the urban area, this kind of shows what the distribution of customers is, and it closely relates to revenue, which isn't too surprising. But about half of the residential customers in our system reside in the urban area of the county, with about another third in the rural and a little smaller percentage, the remainder then in our distant rural mountain area. And obviously, and about over 2/3 of the commercial customers are in the urban area. Next slide, please. So as we look at, so this kind of gives a little breakdown of the components of the franchise fee, or the franchise fee, excuse me, of the fee that residents pay for their service. About 50% of that is what we call collection cost. So in the urban area, you have yard debris, recycling, and garbage service provided. In the other two zones, in our more rural zones, it's only recycling and a garbage fee. But the collection costs make up just about 50% of that overall fee, and that's things such as truck expenses, equipment, your containers, your carts, and that kind of thing, as well as your labor, fuel, those types of items. And then another 30% of that overall fee is in the disposal component. So both yard debris disposal and solid waste disposal as well, so garbage disposal as well. And then, of course, there's overhead in there that's thrown on there. And then we have when we set the fees, we put a return on revenue, or what we refer to also as an operating margin. So we've referred to it in the report as a margin. And that margin is intended to cover income taxes, because our review is prior to any income tax deductions, and allows for capitalization, and then, of course, a return to owners as well. And then we collect a 5% franchise fee on gross revenues, and that is also a part of that rate or fee paid by the customers. Next slide, please. So when we review these reports and we're kind of looking ahead to estimating kind of what our future revenue requirements are going to be, we kind of begin with what we call known and measurable expenses. These are expenses that where the collectors really are price takers. They have no choice in those costs going forward. And so we take a look at that, and we take a look at where that margin is on the entire system, and if we see that it's falling outside of a range, which was in the report, we have about an 8 to 12% range. We look and make sure that these known and measurables will keep the collectors in the range. And we've had a pretty steady approach over the years by doing it that way, so we don't fall out of the range and have to, provide for super, really big increases. And we've been pretty successful with that over time. So, one of those known and measurables this year that we're looking at, and they change from year to year, but typically you're going to see labor, which is a negotiated contract obligations. And of course, prior to the negotiations, owners have an opportunity to curtail some of those costs, but they're also providing living wages to the drivers and that sort of thing. So then also we have disposal, which this year you can see is a 17% increase in the disposal tip fee. And we kind of peg the disposal cost on the Metro tip fee, and the reason for that is because the services the operational services, the disposal services, the transportation services for those entities are procured through a public process. And so we feel comfortable pegging it to that. The other private transfer stations in the region, some have fees that are higher that collectors use, and some have fees that are lower and or at least mirror what the Metro fee is. So that's why we choose to use that fee. And then we have fuel. We've noticed that fuel increase is happening, as everybody can see and notices, and this is a little bit lower than what the Western Fuel Index indicates, but it's because our collectors have a mix of biodiesel fuel, diesel fuel, and compressed natural gas, and so that helps kind of mitigate some of those increases. Next slide, please. So this next slide is a component of the recommended cart increases that were reviewed by the Solid Waste Commission on May 20th. And they've brought this recommendation, or we're carrying this recommendation forward on their behalf. So this slide shows the 35-gallon cart service in each of the fee zones, with the labor component, the fuel component, and the disposal fee component shown. And so all the other costs, or all the other fees for the services throughout, the 90-gallon cart, the 60-gallon cart, the miscellaneous charges for recycling only, et cetera, they follow along the same trajectory that the 35-gallon does. The 35-gallon is about 70% of our service, and so that's why. So everything is kind of pegged to that. And attachment 2 in your packet will show kind of what those cost increases are on each of those fees. Okay, next slide, please. And this just further illustrates what the percentage increase is for the recommended fee change for the 35-gallon cart. We're looking at $1.35 in the urban area, $1.50 in the rural, and $2 in the distant rural. And we also have a mountain zone that is reviewed at the same time that the distant rural reviewed based on the distant rural collectors and their expenses, and it has just a built-in differential for it because it primarily is a small area that serves the government camp area and the Forest Service area east of here. Next slide, please. This next slide just indicates kind of what the change over time has been of the 35-gallon fee, and kind of put in the CPI increase on there just as a reference. You can see the one balloon there kind of shows where we had a big increase in 2018, kind of pegged to the recycling processing expenses that went up, and we've noticed that revenue is coming back to recycling, and those costs are going down, or at least holding steady. So I think we did a good job. The board did a good job of recommending an increase during that period of time to keep our collectors whole. Next slide. And this just shows the components of the recommended increase for the commercial container fees. And it's kind of hard because there's obviously a myriad of service options for containers. That a business can choose a 1 yard once a week, an 8 yard, twice a week for a month, and that sort of thing. So we kind of, but this just shows, so we start with, what is it on a per yard basis? And this shows kind of what those components are. And then next slide, please. And based on that, we kind of peg to the 4 yard twice a week. It's one of the more popular. We see that occurring fairly often in the commercial, urban commercial area. And so that's to try to put a picture of what that increase looks like, that $1.36 a yard. Then this kind of spells it out. It's probably about $50 a month, in the urban area, a little under $50 a month for a business. So we are certainly open to questions.
Real quick before we get into that.
Yes, please.
So just to cue up the topic that we're here to discuss today. So there are basically 3 options that have been presented to the board for consideration. The first is to maintain fees at the current levels until next year's annual fee review. Essentially, just to clarify what that means, that basically means that we would be taking out, we would be below the regional standard for that operating margin we've discussed with all of you with the haulers, that 8 to 12%. Essentially, without the proposed fee increase, each of the fee zones are estimated to fall below the range in 2021. Viewed at the composite level across the system, the margin would likely be around 4 to 4.5%. In the urban zones alone, this translates to approximately about $1 million shortfall. Okay. The second is to approve a fee increase based on the existing known and measurable costs for cart containers and drop box services to be effective July 1, 2021. and is approved by the Solid Waste Commission. And option number 3 is to propose an alternative to the proposed fee increase and what that might look like. At this point, we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have and are open for discussion.
Thank you. I have several questions, but Commissioner Scholl, you're in the queue.
Yes, just so this is clear for the public that are watching these proceedings today. If this option 1 is approved, their 35-gallon cart fee per month goes up by $1.35. Is that right?
I believe you mean option 2. Option 1 is not to increase the prices.
Oh, I'm sorry, option 2. I'm sorry, Dan.
Commissioner, that would be correct. Yes.
Okay, so
For a resident with a 35-gallon cart.
$1.35 per month increase,
Correct.
which reflects a 4% increase over the current rate. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, Commissioner Scholl?
No.
Okay. When was the last time these rates were increased?
I'd have to say last year.
Yep.
Yes.
And when was the last time they were increased before that?
They have increased most every year.
So
They
it's trying-
increase every year. Yet, Dan says we're going to look at $1 million shortfall if they're not increased again. Did you say that, Dan?
I did.
Well, what efforts are you taking to eliminate the shortfall besides increasing rates on the backs of our ratepayers?
I would assume the discussion would then translate to service cuts.
No, no, no. See, I get a rate increase every year. And your answer to eliminate my rate increase is to decrease my service. That's not an answer. See, government keeps raising fees on the backs of its citizens. You know this. Yet, we're at a time when I don't see any big raises given to our taxpayers. Taxes keep going up. They keep going up because government can't seem to figure out how to contain costs. If I was running this as a business, which obviously we are not, I would start looking at what the cost drivers are. Now, you said fuel's going up. I understand that. But the big elephant in the room is the 17% increase from Metro. What is the county franchise fee of 5% used for?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially that fee is set aside to fund programs that we are required to implement through
All
state.
of the fee is required?
It establishes those revenues to fund those efforts.
And what are they?
Chair Smith, we have a number of programs that are required under state, regional, and by our own code to provide Oregonians with, to meet the requirements of the Opportunity to Recycle Act, which was established in the early 90s and has since been updated several times. And those requirements include, for example, the provision of guidance for how to recycle properly at home and at work. So we do outreach and pay for publications and newsletters, for example, that share that information per those requirements. We have actually several waste reduction program elements and recycling program elements that are covered under that statute. And it would take some time, but we would be happy to go through those, enumerate those requirements in further detail at any time.
We have recycling requirements under the 5%. What else? Is that all?
It covers the cost to administer the franchise system itself, which is, of course, a contract for the third-party CPA, staff time that we spend to oversee the system. It also covers code enforcement. So all of the code enforcement that happens in unincorporated Clackamas County that deals with solid waste is something that's paid for out of the franchise fee. Our program also pays for the dump stoppers program, contributes to the cost of the dump stoppers program that addresses illegal dumping in public lands and privately owned lands in forests. Let's see. Rick, am I missing something important?
No, I think that's
Those are
pretty
the
big.
largest
Those are the big ones.
cost areas for us.
So I suspect if this rate increase goes forward today, you're going to come back next year and you're going to be singing the same song. Oh, we need another rate increase. And then the next year, you're going to come back. Oh, we need another rate increase, yet nothing was done to curb the increased costs. So when is that going to happen?
Just to clarify that, because one portion of the discussion, we did have a dialogue with the prior board about the Metro increase in the tipping fee. We had a discussion around that. We think that we are currently developing another strategic program to ensure the board is a part of any of those discussions, because they're off cycle, if that makes sense. They make those decisions that aren't in cycle with our fees. They are established prior, so they feed into how we calculate our fees. So the question is how, and us coming to you and saying, how would the Board of County Commissioners like to engage in those discussions with Metro about any proposed fee increase associated with tipping of materials?
And just to add to that, if I might, Chair, last year, when Metro began to share information about the proposed fee increase that has since been passed, we brought that to the board, and what resulted from that was a letter to Metro asking for greater transparency and engagement around their disposal fee setting process. So what we would do this year, I presume, would build on that, at your request.
I feel like I'm talking to a brick wall, talking to you two gentlemen. Seriously. I'm not going to vote for this, and hopefully you can find the vote someplace to vote for this, because my questions have never been answered. You're going to come back next year for another rate increase, and then the next year you're going to come back for another increase, and in all good conscience, I will not support continued rate increases on the citizens of the Clackamas County, because I said I wouldn't. Now, your jobs may be stable. You'll live here long after I'm gone. But I represent a certain constituency in the county, and I do not appreciate what is being presented here today or the fact that my questions have not been answered. Commissioner Schrader.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to talk to you folks a little bit about the drivers, and it seems to me that one of the big elephants in the room is the Metro tipping fee. I think the sense I got, tell me if I'm correct or not, is that they're looking to expand remove the Metro's transfer station, okay, the one south here, okay, because there's always changes and new efficiencies in how we monitor and how we dispose of hazardous materials and whatever. But they're also looking at building a west side. When you say west side, is that in the Washington County area, or?
Yes.
Or is it? Yeah. So is that the sense I got that part of that is contributing to fee increases, but what I'm also hearing is a lot of these fee increases, the things that we're talking about, are out of our control. They're almost inflationary. I mean, you've got labor costs, you've got transfer costs that increase, fuels costs, and so maybe if you could just break that down. Well, you already did break it down for us, having looked at those graphs. But I guess that I would say, Commissioners, is a good portion of this is really market-driven and out of our control, and that's why we have the franchise owners with their suggestions of what we need to do in order to have efficiency of service and in order to allow them to do their jobs with their employees. I think the big issue here is as we've just said, is the transparency that Metro has in terms of having these tipping fees increase. What was the percentage of increase with the tipping fees? 17%? Yeah. I mean, that's really pretty unusual for me, and not knowing if indeed we may be paying for another station for citizens, constituents outside of our umbrella and purview. That, to me, seems to be most of maybe the control that we have, if any, at the table, pushing back. The other increases, as I said, I just see that it's inflation, and I think we're going to continue to see inflation. I think we're going to continue to see inflationary fees and costs across the board. It's already happening with food. It's already happening with fuel. It's already happening. You can see it. So some of these, again, I wouldn't I think staff is really trying to do the best they can under the circumstances with the reality that they're facing. And Chair, I understand I understand the sense that people are so frustrated right now. I get it. Nobody wants to see a fee increase. I mean, people have struggled with disasters, you name it. But my suggestion is if we can't come to a decision today, maybe we should wait until we have the full board. Megan, I'm willing to make a move to support the fee increase now, even though I'll hold my nose
Well,
to it.
Commissioner Schrader, we have two other commissioners, I think, in the queue who will
Yes, yeah.
opine on their opinion.
Well, no, I'll be glad to wait. I don't have a problem with that. but,
And
you
you've
know.
signaled that you could support it, and I signaled that I will not support it.
Not gladly, not with.
Well, it's, a yes is a yes.
Yes, it is,
A yes
but
is a yes, a
but
no
you-
is a no.
but you
There's no
have-
degree.
Chair.
So-
Yes, there is, Chair, because you have to recognize the drivers that are driving this. And most of them are out of our control.
Well,
That's
see,
just that's my practical opinion.
and maybe those drivers that are increasing fees in Clackamas County at this rate need to be held more accountable than they are. And we're going to discuss that. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Thank you. The 17% metro tipping fee really didn't have, as I recall from our last discussion, a really big effect on the bill to the homeowner. Is that correct? It's not that big.
It's a smaller proportion of the total.
Yes, it's a
Total combination of charges.
Right, exactly, yeah. That's
So you
what I
don't- You
recall.
don't see a direct 17% increase in the.
Sure, exactly right, yeah. And on your report that supported your documents today, we've got a 25.9% fuel increase over last year, is that right? That's what you're, yeah, that's big. So my question is this, because I want to try to understand what this $1.35 means to the contractor that's picking up my garbage.
That's a
Does this
great
increase hold his profitability where it is now? Okay, in other words, there's not a lot of extra profit for the people that come to my door to pick up my trash with this $1.35. If the $1.35 is not approved, tell me, Dan, who loses the money? Is it the person picking up the garbage? Is it, where is it? Where does the loss come from?
It's primarily, correct me if I'm wrong, it's primarily the reduction in operating range that we had talked about. If you recall, that 8 to 12%, and that's the money that the haulers are collecting for that operating standard. Currently, the proposal right here has it at 10%. Regionally, you see it's a regional standard for all of the haulers throughout the region. So when you talk about that reduction takes that percentage down. If you look at our materials, down to about half of that, actually about 4%. In some areas, the distant rural, down to like 2.86%. So it takes that margin down pretty significantly.
Okay, the problem with that is that we run the risk of not attracting contractors that want to work for us, and that's really important, isn't it? It is to me, anyway.
You lose competition in the marketplace.
Yeah, exactly right.
Or there's a
And-
threat that might happen.
Yeah, and I want to say this, I have never heard any of my constituents complain about their service. We don't really talk about the price of the bill, but none of them have ever told me, Mark, I'm unhappy with the service I get in Clackamas County for garbage pickup, and that's important.
We actually do surveys every year, and I can't remember what the approval rating was.
The last one was 89% of surveyed customers said that their service was very good or good.
And that's 89% is like unheard of good, isn't it?
Well, we're proud of it.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Is Paul in the queue? Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. So,
I didn't know he was here.
I think we got to put this into context, overall, the big picture. I guess with the discussion we had, a couple months ago with regard to the tipping fee and, my, expressing the rate utility model of trying to make sure that we're not, holding the rates back. And the net result of that is seeing these spikes. So, whether it's smoothing or averaging, but something that kind of gives some stability in the rates as possible. And I think what this year has exposed is that, the process that we go through around this time of the year, I obviously confuse that with the other discussion we had with regard to tipping fees, but it certainly has opened the door and exposed a number of other things in light of Metro's efforts to talk about, the South Station and their expansion ideas, and then hearing about the West Side facility and getting a better picture of the competitors out there, the private sector who's out there doing different facets of collection, not necessarily the same exact model that South Station, for example, provides with household hazardous waste and so forth. So I don't know who can answer this, maybe Rick. Rick, if we don't raise the rates, basically Metro still gets their increase, correct?
Right?
That is correct, Commissioner.
Great.
Okay. So I'm going to park this topic for a second and shift to another question. When do we foresee a discussion with regards to what incurred cost and forecasting it may be if they proceed forward with expanding or, coming up with a model solution for expanding the capacity in Clackamas County with South Station or the facility they're talking about building, or two facilities, and then we'll also be paying or having financial impacts due to the West Side facility. So when do we have that dialogue? It seems to me that, in recognition of the letter we sent, that maybe we would have seen some activity as far as them reaching out with some kind of a forecasting or some kind of an outreach. But as a member of MPAC way back in 2005 at Metro, 2005, 6, and 7, we talked about these things back in the day. And, Commissioner Schrader and I have somewhat commiserated in a number of settings on a number of topics that it seems like that the discussion at a lot of the regional tables like MPAC and JPAC has really been, I would say, somewhat, the substance is vanishing. Our influence seems to be, falling away, and I just don't see a lot of active engagement of the elected officials who are put in these positions, whether it's garbage rates here at this topic or whether it's, tolling proposal. I mean, it's as though that the elected officials who have to answer to it and who are elected by their constituents don't seem to have the voice on these topics that they should. And the table's not being set. I have not sat at a table, maybe Commissioner Schrader can comment on this. I haven't sat at a table to talk about regional rates for waste disposal or tipping fees or these increases. And in my conversation with Commissioner Schrader last week, in 2 years, they haven't even talked about this. No. So I guess, again, I know I've shifted the conversation slightly, but when do we have that conversation? Because if we don't have a choice, and no matter what, the fee is going to get, Metro's going to get their share of their rate increase. They're just going to realize it. We're stuck, and I think maybe our citizens, our haulers, our people that are out there doing the hard work, the boots on the ground, will be suffering the consequences if they don't really get that compensation. So, a 2x4 not too long ago, cost a couple $3, and now it's like $8. There are gasoline, fuel. We are surrounded by increases all the time. So I think we need to be sensitive to the realities and realize that punishing perhaps or is perceived as punishing or the providers of the service on the ground that they're happy about, that are picking their garbage up in front of their homes every day, they're not. I don't think they're the problem. The problem is really the bigger picture. Part of it being economic, and part of it being, or my fear is that building 2 new facilities in the region is going to, someone's going to pick up the price tag. And when do we have that dialogue? So I know I opened the door to a number of conversations, and I don't know if there's really a question embedded in that, but it's certainly an expression that maybe here's the question. We sent the letter. What real response? What have we seen since we sent the letter as far as engaging us?
Well, Commissioner Savas, I can answer one item. The initial response was that Metro offered to attend a board meeting, and we scheduled and they delivered a presentation at a policy session. Clearly, that was just a start to the conversation, but you recall they were in front of us. Let's see, several weeks ago now, and that was. I think their first step at responding to the letter. Later this fall and winter, Metro will look again at the disposal fees, and I would think that MPAC would be an appropriate forum to discuss it further. We can do our best as staff to identify other forums. Dan, do you want to add?
Yeah, I'd like to expand on it. And Commissioner Savas, this is going to kind of be near and dear to your heart because it aligns with some of the work we've been doing on the transportation side. These are the topics that we wanted to come in front of the Board of County Commissioners and discuss. Where is the table at? How do we press the topic to the table? Number two, if you look at when is that discussion going to happen? It's going to happen fall and winter, okay? Number three, the discussion is how do we develop regional partnerships in this discussion? Like we've developed regional partnerships on the transportation front to engage a larger consortium of individuals who have similar concerns about these rate increases or proposed rate increases. And those are strategic steps that we can take to have a discussion with Metro as a whole in regards to the additional costs.
Yeah, well, it seems as though, and I think I've been, not all, but I've probably been to every public outreach effort that Metro did with South Station, for example. And not once in any of those was there any mention of a West Side facility.
Right.
Not once in any of those discussions has there been anything that had a reflection or anything with regards to what that might cost us in the long run. Granted, I know it's early. I know what site they purchased, but I think that there's been no discussion about how that table will be set. And if they're just going to come to Clackamas County and talk to Clackamas County, and that's not fair to Washington County and the whole region because those costs will go up for everyone. And then nor is it fair for Washington County or for us not to hear about the Washington County site, the West Side site. It's not Washington County, the government, but out in that area. So, I'm hearing concerns from our partners and friends in Washington County that they're also have, an issue or a challenge with, number one, they've got a need, but the same token is they got a concern about the cost. So how do we contain the cost, and how do we make it, what does that look like for every home and resident being served with disposal services? It just makes us really be the bearer of bad news when really this is really, so to speak, a pass-through to some degree. Granted, it looks like, in all full honesty, and maybe Rick or Evan can clarify, but it seems like a majority of the dollars and cents in this regard are really due to economic conditions than they are Metro. Am I right on that one?
Commissioner, are you asking what was the split in terms of overall economic change versus Metro's disposal fee in contributing to the proposed and recommended increase?
Well, no, let me just clarify. Maybe I'll make it easier. Of the $1.35 per household in that one chart that you displayed, let's see, let's say the urban residential area goes up $1.35 a household per month. How much of that $1.35 is inflationary, due to inflationary costs, and how much of that $1.35 is due to the Metro tipping fee increase?
Yes, so we can answer that question, Commissioner. On page 5 of your staff
Right.
report, Table 2 illustrates that of that $1.35 increase, 17 cents is from labor, 9 cents is from fuel, and 91 cents is from the tip or disposal fee increase.
Okay,
There we go.
okay. So, which we have no control over,
Correct.
the 91
Correct.
cent.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
there are other expenses too that are rising. These are the ones that we know are, known and measurable. I mean, trucks have increased in their expense. I mean, these trucks that they're driving around now are $325,000. When I started, they were 65, and $90,000. So, things have changed considerably. And the collectors do a really good job of being as efficient as possible. So the costs that we're putting in front here are just the ones that we are known and measurable. There's no other inflationary pressures there or anything. These are just expenses that we know the collectors are going to have to take regardless of what else happens. And, other expenses are going to go up. The next truck that they buy is going to be more expensive. The interest that they pay when they, purchase it is going to be higher. All of those things are going to happen as well. But these are the things that we know will happen, and that if we do this, then we will at least keep them in the range. They're not very happy with this because they certainly like more, but this is where we try to do, the job that I think we're tasked with doing is keeping those costs as compressed as possible and making sure that we have a good service out there and citizens are getting the value.
Yeah. So when you responded to Commissioner Scholl earlier, I got confused, which is why I asked the question again when we said that the tipping fee increase was the smallest increase. And the way maybe I didn't hear it right, but the way I interpreted it is that, was it 17%, that increase was the smallest of the increases on a percentage basis? Or maybe I just frankly just misheard it altogether. So with that, I apologize. Don't even respond to my question. I'll just leave it there. My issue is that I believe there needs to be a regional table discussion with all the counties involved to talk about what we're going to expect with regards to their capital construction projects and those impacts. And I would like to have a better idea what the breakdown of that 91 cents increase is and how much of that 91 cents is going to go towards something other than the actual realized cost of the tipping, so to speak. Is that going to be towards property acquisition? I mean, we don't know that. You don't have that. But, do you have any inkling of how much that 91 cents is going to be towards purchase of property or capital construction?
Commissioner, we would have to look that up and get back to you, but I believe, and I think this was covered in the presentation from Metro staff when they visited, that part of the 91 cents is revenue for property acquisition. There are other cost increases, including the cost to operate the contracts at the existing transfer stations, which were renegotiated a couple of years ago.
Right, and when they were here, did they talk about acquisition of one property or two properties, one in Clackamas and one in Multnomah? Or not Multnomah, but Washington County.
I have to apologize. I don't recall. I know they have mentioned a West Side project in some of their presentations about Metro South, but I do not know if they mentioned it when they were here in front of the board.
I remember a West Side project, and I'm trying to think back. It seems to me the West Side project was the more expensive compared to the East Side project. But, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just close with, I just really wonder, I visit the site of South Metro. I know what the challenges are at times. I'm going to be a little bit funny here, a little bit humorous. But, when I hear people say that the congestion on our highways and our freeways, you can't build your way out of congestion. And when they're talking about the congestion inside the facility, I want to just think about, well, that's almost kind of funny. Can you really build your way out of that? And if we're supposed to live within our means and swallow congestion, then perhaps maybe in the light of the cost, we ought to be, just living within our means to some degree. I'm just, the difficulty for all of us here today, we don't know what the net bill is going to be to build two facilities in this region, and we have no idea, no clue. And there's no public table for elected officials who have to do what we're doing here today to have that voice, and let alone the haulers and everyone else that are impacted by where those facilities are sited. That's all I have.
Commissioner Schrader?
So I'm going to ask a a procedural question here. Is this something that we should table for now? What's the timeline in terms of when we actually have to make a hard decision on this? Because our haulers did approve this. Can you enlighten to us as what part of their conversation was? And Paul is absolutely correct. We've never talked about this at the regional level. We've all kind of been.
So let me just
Practice.
start with an answer to the first question. So essentially, the modeling that's before you today is based off an adoption by July 1st,
Okay,
okay?
all right.
So if there was a delay or an adjustment, that would then essentially rekindle a need to kind of do an assessment to some extent about what that looks like.
So I'm sorry, Dan, could you repeat?
If there was a delay past July 1st in its adoption, then there would need to be a discussion around how recalculating some of those fees and seeing what it might look like. Because essentially, you're taking a month's worth of collection off the table.
Okay.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in your
Correct.
opinion, of course, our franchise owners would potentially be pretty,
They would be bearing the brunt of that
well, they're
decision.
bearing the brunt of that. And I think that's what concerns me the most, too, is those businesses and those people who are doing the job. So if we're on a tight timeline, I would be glad to make a motion. Again, I'm not happy about this. I'm not happy the way we've been treated regionally. I think that the lack of transparency there seems to be pretty, and at Metro seems to be pretty consistent with things. But I would be willing to make a motion to accept the fee increase largely for the sake of our franchise owners at this point. And
Well, there's
they
three
were-
options to consider, Commissioner Schrader.
It would be option 2, I think, is
Well,
what
Do I hear a motion?
yes, I move to okay option 2. And if there's no second, then it will die.
I'll
as-
second it.
Okay, we'll second it. All
Commissioner
right.
Scholl, you're in the queue.
Okay.
Yes. 2 weeks from this Thursday is 1 July. That's when the tipping fees kick in. When you strip out that portion of this rate increase to the tipping fees, we have very little left. It's really a mute issue in my mind. If Metro hadn't increased tipping fees, this rate increase would be really small. So I don't see anything we can do now other than approve this 4% increase and get our haulers back to work on 1 July and keeping their profit level margins where they are. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to maintain my consistency and vote no, and I appreciate all the discussion. I appreciate what people have said here today. And there was a statement made that says they're sensitive to the reality of this situation. I don't hear anybody talking about the sensitivity of the people paying the bills, of the people paying your salaries. And if I'm the last person standing, I will represent the constituents who are paying the fee increases, the tax increases, as I continue with this. If we didn't have the 17% rate increase for Metro, it would be a 37-cent increase. 37 cents is all it would be. Metro's out of control, totally out of control. I mean, you can go down the line of services they're involved in, and every time you turn around, it's a mess. It's a total mess. I will not support Metro's fee increase on the backs of county taxpayers. And I will remain consistent in that.
And also, I might add, Chair, if you let me do that, because you're being very consistent, and I don't disagree with you. It's also on the backs of the franchise. It's not only on
I
our
understand the
citizens.
businesses, like I said.
It's on the backs of those people, too, which I think is very unfair as well.
It's very unfair.
It's just not fair across the board.
It's very unfair, but, you know, you look at the labor cost is only 16 cents. Holy cow. You know, the labor costs, those are the same people who are paying the rate increases, the labor that goes to work for this. That's not much of a labor cost. That's not much of a raise I see for these people who are out there every day hauling other people's garbage, stuff that people don't want. I mean, I wouldn't want to be a garbage hauler. I'm glad there are, but fuel's going up for a lot of different reasons. That's too bad. But I will not support a rate increase. I do not feel that we have any questions answered. I will not support this at all. Do I see somebody in the queue? Commissioner Savas, is that you?
Yeah, I appreciate it. It is. I appreciate your comments, Chair. You know, and if again, I just want to restate, and staff verified verified my conclusion or answer, and that is that no matter what we do, whether we approve this or not today or not, Metro still gets their increase. So we're not stopping that. They're just going to get it, and it's going to be borne or on the backs of the people that are providing the service. That's the injustice about this.
Yeah.
So,
that's what I'm saying too.
you know, that's the unfairness. So I think we need to be candid. I think we need to be intellectually honest with everyone here that you know, granted it's a fee being passed on, but we're not stopping the Metro increase. Metro increase is happening, despite our vote, no matter what happens here. We're just punishing the wrong people, which I said earlier. So I intend on not only supporting this, but I just want to just say one thing is, I know some people that drive these trucks and do this work, and you know, not all jobs are pleasant, and not all jobs are easy. But you know, we've got to encourage people in the labor market that we're in to go to work and feel good about what they do for a living, and honor and respect those folks that are in that industry. So. You know, I came in an industry where, you know, we were disparaged because, you know, we either knew about cars or worked on cars or whatnot. And there were a lot of disparaging remarks made about people in my industry, and we had to bear that. So I don't think that, that somehow burdening them even further with economic impacts and the comments does anyone any good. So knowing that there's a labor issue right now for getting people to go to work, I think we need to encourage that and respect that every job has dignity, and without those people doing the work, we'd be in a heck of a mess. So that concludes my comments, and it's unfortunate, but I think that I would really like to have some kind of, Martha, maybe you can at Impact,
Yeah.
And staff, or maybe we send one more letter and talk about setting a regional table for discussion about these impacts with regards to these two new facilities, because we're going to be in a worse position than we are today. If it's 91 cents just to buy the land, imagine how much it's going to be to build the two facilities.
So I would be willing to call the chair of MPAC and see if we can get something on the agenda just to push back a little bit.
Well, Metro's going to want a property tax increase to pay for that facility. Don't think for 1 minute that a rate increase is going to pay for a $300 million facility. That's just not going to be, that's not even feasible. So this little tiny rate increase that we see, the 17%, is not even a drop in a bucket, people, to build a facility of that size. I'm going to measure my words carefully. I heard you say, by not approving this, we would be punishing the wrong people. I take great exception to that statement. How can you say for 1 second, by me not voting for this, that I am somehow punishing the wrong people? We answer to our constituencies. We answer to the voters. There's a motion on the table. Without any further objections, we'll take a vote. Please call the poll.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
Chair Smith?
No. Motion passes 3-1.
Okay.
Gary, what's up next?
So Gary will be scheduling this. Historically, it's just gone on consent and come forward. So,
You'll have to do it next week. That's the last business meeting of the year, next Thursday.
okay.
We're ready to go.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you,
Thank you.
commissioners.
Thank you.
Dan, is your team here for the next session?
I believe so. I believe they're out in the hallway.
Okay. We take a 2-minute break, Chair?
Yes. Welcome back to our policy session on this June 15th, 2021. Gary, can you tee up the next issue?
Yes, Chair Smith. Next is Land Use Housing Strategies Project Phase 1, File ZDO 277. We have staff from the Planning and Zoning Division of Transportation and Development, Dan Johnson, Jennifer Hughes, Martha Fritzie. Dan, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the time again, Commission. We are here essentially requesting direction on whether to move forward with the zoning and development ordinance amendments related to Phase 1 of the Land Use Housing Strategies Project. Essentially, this is direction we're looking forward is the authority to push forward to the Planning Commission and then back to the board for a hearings process. I just want to highlight that. You're not making final decisions on this now. It's basically, what do you feel comfortable with pushing forward to the Planning Commission? What do you not feel comfortable with, okay? I want to highlight the fact that when we came back and talked to you last time, we were talking to you about 3 phases. We're just talking to you about Phase 1 today. We are going to go through a PowerPoint with you because there are 3 unique components to this packet, one of which is an increase in the density bonus for affordable housing. The second is right-sizing the parking requirements for multimodal developments. And last is increasing the maximum allowed density in certain commercial zones, okay? We're going to ask for direction on each one of those independently. If the board is in support of that, or if the board has concerns and is not in support of those various topics. Well, our hope is that by the end of this, we get clear direction on which of those aspects the board is comfortable with, that we can then forward those forward to the Planning Commission and get moving on this project, okay? Any questions?
Go for it.
Perfect. I'm going to hand it over to the amazing Martha Fritzie to go forward with this presentation.
Thank you. All right, here we go. Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction, Dan. I won't reiterate anything, but we are, except to say that we are here to talk about 3 specific strategies and whether or not to move these forward into a hearings process. So next slide, please. And so if you'll recall from our last planning session and other policy sessions and other information, the Land Use Housing Strategies Project is a very large project. It's a multi-phase project. It has taken input from a housing needs analysis completed in 2019. It's taken input from a task force that was put together in 2018, 2019. It's taken input from several mandates from the board, from the public, and we've created this project that we are intending to complete in 3 phases. And today we are talking about the first one. Next slide, please. The 3 strategies we're talking about are listed here. Dan already articulated them. I think the important thing to think about as we talk about each of these strategies and as we talk about this project generally moving forward over the next year or 2, that no single strategy that we talk about is going to solve our housing problem. Each of these we're looking at as a way to move the needle. And each of these would potentially affect a different geographic area, a different population, different types of property owners. And that's intentional. It's intended to spread the potential impacts largely across a lot of different properties and populations. Next slide, please. So the first 2 strategies that we're talking about, the affordable housing bonus and right-sizing parking for multifamily developments, would largely affect the properties that are in red here. They are all of the properties within the unincorporated urban area that allow for multifamily housing to be developed. And so next slide, please. The first of these that we're going to talk about today is the affordable housing density bonus. And hopefully you'll recall from our previous meetings, the affordable housing density bonus is essentially a voluntary program where if a developer wanted to come in and provide some housing that is affordable to lower income households and is guaranteed to be affordable to lower income households over a certain amount of time, they would actually be allowed to build a few more units than ordinarily would have been allowed on that lot. And so I tried to make it visually make sense, a graphic example for you. Our current bonus is not very effective. Our current bonus is illustrated on the left. So if a developer came in to build 100 units and they said, I'm going to provide 8 affordable units, we would allow them to have 8 more units on top of the 100. If they wanted to do 100 affordable units, they would still only be allowed to add 8 units. It's not a very big incentive to provide affordable housing. What staff is proposing is to increase the bonus that would be allowed if a developer, if the same developer came in with 100 units, wanted to provide at least 50 of those at affordable for low-income households, they would actually be allowed at the end of the day to build 150 units instead of 100. The increase in the proposed bonus is something that is pretty common in other jurisdictions. We talked to housing developers, specifically affordable housing developers, and this is something that seems to be supported in the development community, and something that is, we think and they think would provide much more of an incentive to provide more affordable housing units. And so this is the first strategy. We're going to stop after each one of these and ask you if you have any questions for me or for Jennifer Hughes, and ask you the question of whether or not this is a strategy you would like to see move forward to the Planning Commission for public hearing, and then back here in front of the board for public hearing as something to change in our zoning code.
Okay, the question I have, since the development community likes this density bonus, how does that play into the parking? You get to build more units, but do you get more parking spaces?
It does not change anything about the required parking ratio. A unit is a unit is a unit. So
Well,
they,
it should. I mean, if you're building, for instance, if I'm building 100 units and I get a density bonus of 150, I need to raise the amount of parking to go along with that.
okay, I guess I didn't explain that. If you're required to have 1 parking space per unit, for 100 units, you'd have to have 100. If we give them a density bonus to 150 units, they'd have to have 150 parking spaces.
Okay.
So the parking requirement changes with the units. Does that make sense? I'm probably not
Yes, that
explaining
makes
well.
sense. Thank you, Martha, for explaining that. I'm just wanted a point of clarification. I don't have a problem with the housing density bonus unless there's something I don't know. Commissioners, do you, Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, if we go to maximum 50 bonus units, how would that speed up projects to enable us to meet our 2025 performance CLACKAMAS goal? I mean, is that going to be something that you see significantly bringing us closer to that goal?
I see it close.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I see it closing the gap, because if you think about development of these types of projects, they're all based off pro formas. And so affordable or not, there are revenues that come in that are based off unit costs, that are based off construction costs. And this bonus allows more flexibility to provide more units in there to collect additional revenues. Again, I want to highlight and go back to the topic the chair brought up. This on its own has no correlation. It would fall under the current parking standards, okay? And that's why you also have a parking one, but we'll talk about that separate and independent of this one.
Commissioner Savas?
I don't have any quarrel with the density bonus in and of itself. I'm glad that we're breaking this out into 3 different conversations. But the question I have is that let's just say the housing density bonus is granted, what assurances do we have going forward that they remain affordable units in the future?
That's actually written into the zoning code as a requirement. And so they would need to demonstrate that the units are affordable to a certain income level for a period of anywhere from 30 to 40 years, whatever we choose to put in there. And that's pretty typical with the way that these are written.
Okay, so from a jurisdictional standpoint, let's just say the city, I'll just use the city of Milwaukee. The city of Milwaukee puts a housing density bonus in place. Are they going to, so to speak, actually staff that and monitor that year after year to make sure that they are indeed? I mean, what is the admin element That's really the core of my question. So would that require what, H3S to do this? Would this require DTD to do this? Who basically, I don't want to use the word police it, but who's going to monitor that to make sure that they're in compliance going forward?
So it's generally done either through something like a deed restriction, or quite frankly, a lot of the funding sources that provide funding for low-income developments also require it, and so it can be done, it can be implemented through those, if the developer's using those funding requirements also. But if that's not the case, then it's something like a deed restriction.
Okay, so it won't be actually realized unless the property's sold then, right? I mean, because let's just say a development company purchases the property, they build it, they take advantage of the density bonus, they implement it, and there's no title change. It's written into the deed. My question is, let's say they own it for 50 years. Over that 50-year cycle, what assurances or what administrative tools are there to assure if this person didn't use tax credits that they would be able to, that they would, fulfill that they would fulfill that low-income requirement?
Well, with the exception of the deed restriction we have right now, there is no real monitoring in place. I mean,
Okay.
you basically, it's a statutory requirement that at any point in time, should information come to our attention, we could go through a code enforcement procedure to enforce those codes and provisions that are adopted because those parameters that you're talking about, Commissioner Savas, are set through the land use process. So they come to us with a project, we entitle that project based off the information they have given us, and then as a condition of approval would establish a deed restriction. And if there was any information that came to our attention that they were not actively meeting those requirements, it would be a proceeding through our code enforcement department.
All right.
But I guess I do want to highlight, though, you will see, especially the ones that you think are taking advantage of the higher density bonuses, would more than likely be in concert with the 4 or 9% tax credit programs that are going through H3S, which would be regulated through their program as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any further comments on the density bonus? I think it's acceptable. You can move on to the next issue.
Yes. Right-sizing multifamily parking. All right, so currently our zoning code has a parking standard for all multifamily developments, regardless of where they're located, regardless of what sort of income population they're serving. And the standard is listed here in this table in the left-hand column. For a one-bedroom unit, it's 1.5 spaces per unit. And then it goes up from there, depending on how many bedrooms each unit is providing. Based on data, based on a lot of information that we have gathered, based on information from developers, it appears that our parking ratios are fairly high, and particularly for projects that are located in close proximity to a light rail, and particularly for projects that are serving the lower and including really the very low income households. And so in the past, well, our zoning code doesn't have any mechanism really with which to adjust our parking ratio. It just is what it is right now. And so in the past, it has been adjusted by the board on a case-by-case basis. And we do have some projects out there that have reduced parking. Most of the ones that are serving affordable or that are serving lower income households are actually parked around a 1-to-1, so 1 space per unit, which is a reduction from what we have right now. There are some other projects out there that are serving lower income households and or are closer to light rail that have lower parking ratios. To our knowledge, none of these projects have caused any issues to date. And so staff is proposing to allow for some flexibility with the parking standards for multifamily housing, including just a general reduction, small reduction for any unit, market rate, affordable, located anywhere, by 0.25 spaces per unit. So that's the second column over there. You'll notice that in general, the average would still be higher than 1 space per unit for any development. Even if it was all one-bedroom units, you'd still have 1 space per unit at least. And then the proposal is to allow for further reductions based on affordability level, whether or not they're serving lower income households and/or proximity to light rail station. And in the first reduction, that's in the middle column for affordable units at or below 60% of the area median income, it's a 20% reduction is staff's proposal. And again, you'll notice in general, it will average out to be about one per unit unless somebody is building only small units. It will be just under 1 per unit. And the bigger reduction is for developments that are within a quarter mile of a light rail station or are serving very low-income households at or below 30% of the area's median income. This is the proposal that staff has come up with based on the data we have and based on conversations we've had both with developers, with the public, with you all. I think it's important to keep in mind as we move, if we want to move this forward for hearing, that these numbers are not set in stone. We really want to get an idea today if this is an idea that we want to move forward, and maybe the numbers could be tweaked as we move through the process to everybody's comfort level. And I am going to stop there, I think.
Well, these numbers on the parking densities are really good in theory, but what happens in practice is you build a facility that you limit your parking on, and we assume it's for low income, and I think there's some assumptions based on these parking densities that we don't talk about. The assumption is that if these people are low income, they might not own a car, or they might only own 1 car. And the assumption is if they're low income, they're going to take light rail. I don't know that that's true. And the assumption is when the parking lot fills up with cars, that they're not going to go park on the neighboring street down the road. I mean, I've seen so many areas in the county where that is a situation, you know, the side streets, and all of a sudden you're parking in front of people's private homes, and they're upset about it. And I don't want to create a situation where that happens. Now, I'm mindful of the map. I see where the map is in red and what we're talking about. Well, that's commercial zones, excuse me. But I'm not wholly comfortable. I'm not convinced on your parking densities. Now, I do see here affordable units within a quarter mile of a light rail station. We make the assumption that if somebody lives in a quarter mile of a light rail station, that they're going to take light rail. I don't think that's a correct assumption. Commissioner Savas, are you in the queue?
Yes, I am. So was this on the parking issue on number 2 here? Martha, is this the only thing you were going to present to us and then we're going to move on?
Yes.
Okay, so in the packet where this is covered, this formula, this chart here with the current units and the, so on, in the packet, you have that listed, there's an A, B, C, and then here's this graph, and then down below is D. And D says, let me just read it. In addition to the above, which is the chart that you have displayed here, allow for case-by-case parking reduction of up to 40% based on study or other evidence provided by an applicant that shows fewer spaces are needed. And if you take that 40%, and I'm gathering if I'm reading this correctly, that would mean that 0.6 would go to 0.24. Is that right?
No, and I apologize if that's not clear. That would be another option for a reduction below the all unit rate. So the intent is in no case would it go below this last column here.
Okay, so the last column.
With the
So
0.6.
No, because it's not clear, and so are you saying that the column all the way to the left the all units column is the one that would perhaps be proposed for a 40% reduction from there? Which
Yes,
column are you referencing?
yes, I'm referencing the all units.
Okay. Which brings it down to, that's pretty significant, right? 40% would bring it down to, down to the, below the point, about the 0.8 then. Yeah, about 0.8, right? 1.25 would go to about 1.8, correct?
So it would be the all, I guess it would be the all units with the reduction to the, in the second column, to the 1, the 1.25, and the 1.5. And so the 40% reduction gets you to the numbers that are in the column all the way to the right.
Okay.
And so what that would be is an opportunity if there was a very specific population that a development was serving that wasn't listed on this table, and there was real solid data that shows that it too should get a reduction, then we would have an option to look at it and base it on the data that they provide.
Okay, so, this, I'm gonna do one more, give me 1 second here, I'm doing some math here. So, when we say evidence, or study, I use, in this line of work, so to speak, I use examples that are built around the region as examples of where this works or doesn't work. And I've seen so many examples of where it actually has, I would say, and by local businesses or tenants or residents, disastrous, absolutely disastrous in the sense that the parking is oversubscribed. It's there's not adequate parking in a number of areas, and there's a number of examples, and a lot of them in Multnomah County. I'll just tell you, and on a frequent basis. So this is where I worry a little bit. So when we say evidence, isn't evidence is that more example? Do you mean to say example? Because what would be an example of evidence that shows that fewer spaces are needed? Because evidence seems to be something that actually happened in the past, but this is a proposal about something that's going to go forward. So it doesn't seem like evidence is the right word. But can you give me an example of what evidence would be?
So I guess in my mind, an example would be going and looking at developments that were built at a specific parking with ratio, say one space per unit, and seeing how much parking is actually being used. And that's something that I went out and did for a couple of the low-income housing projects in the region, just to see if the parking lot is being used and count the number of cars. And there have been studies around the Portland region that have done that, and I think that some data is out there, and somebody could certainly go create the data themselves.
Okay, but those are examples though, right? More than they are, to me, they're more examples or more of a study because, if someone, is looking at ones where it didn't work, are we looking at the ones where it doesn't work? I mean, I'm just kind of concerned that could be skewed based on who's doing the work. And it says right there that it would be, provided by the applicant, correct?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay.
And I guess I would say that Part D is not something that has to be in the proposal. It could just simply be the table and you get what you get, and there's no opportunity for any different process. These are all options at this point.
Right. So one more question, and I have a comment. I think I'm done for this for now, and that is so Dan, what instrument did we utilize to reduce the parking at the Fuller Road project that's currently underway?
We used a study with data that was built around prior projects.
I mean, what did the board use though? We didn't use this. I mean, did we just use it? Say, you came to the board and we waived the existing code. Is that what we did?
At the time, I believe
You used
Chandler.
the emergency declaration,
Correct.
the housing emergency declaration.
Oh, okay. So that opens up another question, but that'll maybe for another day.
And in the interest of time, I just want to make sure we're clear. If there are things that you just don't agree with on this, we can just axe out sections versus the entire
Well,
thing.
you know, I don't know that, I'm going to be honest, I don't know that I'm qualified to make a sole decision on your parking densities. I just don't, I know what I don't like when I see it. Martha, you said you went out and you looked at some parking lots in some of these, and what, I didn't hear what your conclusion was when you examined those.
In the few that I looked at, I actually created a little table, which is way back in the back of your packet. There seemed to be adequate parking.
Okay? And the studies you referenced to said the parking densities that you proposed were adequate, is that right?
Yes, I mean, the studies did the same thing near light rail stations and showed that there was, the parking was not all being used.
Okay, I have a letter here dated June 7th, 2021, from the Home Builders Association and the Portland Metropolitan Association of Realtors. It was CC'd to all board members, and it was signed by both. And in page 2, the third paragraph, we support staff recommendations to increase the maximum densities on 20 to 60 units per acre. They also support reduced parking requirements by 0.25 spaces per bedroom unit category. So these two entities have supported, I believe, what you're proposing here today. Is that correct?
Yes, that's referencing the all units, the second
Yes.
column there.
So with that in mind, I don't know that I really want to hold this parking density issue up any further. Board, what do you think?
I gotta,
Oh, Commissioner Scholl.
I just have
Commissioner
a
Scholl's
problem
up.
with that language under D.
I would say this is the minimum required parking spaces per multifamily dwelling unit. When somebody comes to you with a project for approval on it, you can look at that and say, okay, this is the minimum, but this particular site, this particular situation might require a few more or 0.5 parking spaces more per bedroom or something.
They can provide them. It doesn't limit their ability to provide them. But
Yeah,
this is a
right.
minimum.
Exactly. This is a minimum. And these minimums are driven or pushed, endorsed by builders who are looking at increasing efficiency, profitability, and getting more units per acre on there. Okay? So this, by approving this, we're going to get a little bit closer to this performance. CLACKAMAS.
They all relate to the compatibility.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, I understand the mission here. It's just that I understand that the whole, I understand the picture here. It's just, I just have a problem with D. You know, if that's struck, because I think it adds a lot, of confusion. And there are just too many examples of that not working. I think recently, I used the example of a local business, wasn't in a public meeting. I know I talked to staff, but a local business that finally just decided to move. It happens to be in Multnomah County. A friend of mine who's closing his business. He has, between all the other criminal activity in the area and the parking and the dismantled cars and all of the stuff going on, he decided just to leave. He's going to Clark County, north of us, because he's just had it. The point of the matter is that when he started his business years ago and bought the property and built the building, there was not much nearby, but now he's completely surrounded by high density housing that has done really exactly what we're considering here. And that overflow of parking blocks his gate into his business. He had to put a fence around his business.
Yeah.
In my business, I suffered from local businesses nearby not having adequate parking. And I was only allowed 3 parking places per commercial unit that I had, 3. It was practically filled up every day. And not by me, but by local businesses who didn't have adequate parking, and so forth. So that creates real heartaches. Businesses in a neighboring city here in Clackamas County with a high-density unit that went in, their biggest issue, lack of parking. People keep driving because they can't park their car. They can't get customers in the door. So we got to strike a balance. This is where I think I'm just kind of concerned that having some language like that under D, it's going to be impossible for anyone to really see through that or calculate that in a meaningful way and not end up with some kind of a hardship on neighboring properties, whether they're housing units or whatnot. But I've just seen too many examples of it not working. But I'm okay with what's in the graph. I'm just not okay with D.
Yeah, I would agree with Commissioner Savas on that. I still think we're not addressing overflow in other areas. I mean, the more of these units you put into a concentrated area with the same low parking densities, the more problems you're going to have. You're not going to decrease the problems. You're only going to increase the parking problems if you build these units next to one that's already there. It's going to happen. I mean, that's human behavior. And so when I say I know what I don't like when I see it, I see that and I don't like it, and I say that's poor planning. And that's poor foresight, because people fail to take into account people's behaviors. And it's the behaviors of people parking, because the parking lot fills up in the place they're staying in. Oh, well, I'll go park in the next parking lot over, like Paul said in his business. And then, well, that doesn't work, so then I'm going to go park my car down the street because, I don't have. And then what do you do about visitors that come to visit? There's no visitor parking here. It's just for residents. So I have some issues here. I don't know what to do about it, because staff, can you help me?
So what I've heard from Commissioner Savas so far is that he is in support of going forward with the graph that's presented, but not including item number D that's on here that allows flexibility for other random things. There's 2 discussions to have, one of which is, I think the dialogue you're talking about, this is not a lens-type package that has 0 parking. That's the big model that we see that's caused a lot of concern down in that Portland area. But there is the ability to possibly remove some of these lower thresholds that are here, the less than 30%, is a discussion to be had. And the dialogue around maybe just going to the all units model that's there, which is the reduction from the 1.25 to 1. It's also a dialogue that can mature a little bit, and we can hear comments from the community a little bit when it goes through the planning commission process and it comes back to you. But we can obviously share the concerns that our board has a specific focus on the fact that they want to right-size parking. They don't want to underpark facilities. And if there could be information as a part of that process that may come in from the development community, from citizenry, whatever it may be, that may influence that and move that number higher. I'm hearing right now that our board doesn't feel comfortable with anything lower, obviously, but it could be adjusted with that public feedback.
Well, I think it's okay if you take it to the Planning Commission and accurately relay and communicate what Commissioner Savas and I are talking about. And, all the studies in the world, all the numbers and the graphs in the world isn't going to keep a visitor from coming to visit, their son or grandson or whomever, grandpa and grandma's in these, or parking next door. It just doesn't happen. So you need to take that to the Planning Commission. You need to take Commissioner Savas's concern to the Planning Commission. And let's let those folks mull it over and bring it back. How's that?
Sounds like a plan.
All right, what's up next?
So make sure I heard clearly, though, the board is in alignment with Commissioner Savas's recommendation, which would take forward the graph, but not take forward D.
Not take forward the what?
This item D down here that Gabe.
Yes.
Okay, then we will move forward with that. I got to apologize to Martha in the interest of time. I know we're a little bit over. I've asked her to really fast pace this last part of this presentation, so please don't think poorly of us.
Oh, no, go ahead. It's the board that's extending this. It isn't the presenters. So just go ahead and do your due diligence.
So the last strategy we're talking about today has to do with housing density in certain commercial zones. And this is multifamily housing density. And specifically, those that are identified in red on this map are the ones that would be affected. These zones currently do allow housing to be built, but it would be maxed out at 25 units per acre. Can you do the next slide, please? I think it's important to note before we talk about increasing this is to understand that there are lots of other zones in the urban area that are considered employment zones. Many of these zones, particularly those in purple, do not allow housing at all. And so this proposal would affect those red zones that are commercial zones typically found along our major corridors. But there are still a number of other areas where jobs are encouraged and allowed, and housing is not allowed. And so, next slide. This is just sort of a visual representation of what we're talking about when we are talking about increasing the allowed density. Currently, at 25 dwelling units an acre, you're typically looking at a 3-story building like what's on the left there. If you're increasing up to 60 dwelling units an acre, it could look like any of those on the right. You're generally not going to get above about 5 stories for a number of reasons. One is that we're capping it at 60 dwelling units an acre, and the other one has to do with increased construction costs. And so I just wanted to sort of visually look at what we would be proposing here, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, let's talk about using our employment lands for housing here. Now, the mixed housing model may work, but with the lower ground units, businesses, and then possibility of the upper units for housing, that's not a bad model. Does what you're asking here allow for that?
Yes, it is currently allowed and would continue to be allowed.
I am sensitive that we would take any of our employment lands, out of job opportunities and make it for low-income housing.
So that one slide that we provided was in direct response to the concerns and the question that you raised originally. when we
Which
talked
slide
about-
are we talking
Which
about,
slide
Dan?
is that?
The
Go
one with
back a
purple?
slide.
Go back one, I think it's 1 or 2.
It's just one.
Yeah, so,
So that was to highlight the fact that those cross-hatched areas that you see are essentially also employment lands and industrial lands. There is zero allowed residential on any of those
Yeah.
lands. They
I
are
know that.
wholly focused on solely providing employment opportunities for Clackamas County.
But
It just applies to those commercial lands that were, those red areas that were there.
and those are areas oftentimes where there's already housing there, and where it would probably be conducive to having, like I said, commercial on the bottom and housing on top.
The code does not limit that.
They almost like become neighborhoods. Does that make sense?
It does not limit though I will make sure we're clear, it does not require that as well.
But is that the reality of that what would happen, really? I mean, you're going to build, I can't imagine really a developer coming in on speculation, he's going to build a facility where it's all bottom level commercial office space, and then he's going to have housing above it. I don't think that's a reality. I mean, it's good to say we support multiple use housing, but I don't think that's going to happen.
But you do see that kind of development, on the East Coast all the time, though. I mean, even in the old, when you look at, New Rochelle, when you look at Rye, you look at Port Chester, you look at New York, a lot of times what they did was have these commercial cores, and people often lived above, and they still kind of have those frameworks there. It seems to work reasonably well. It's whether or not out here, if we want to really look at implementing something like that. I mean,
Do we
I can
have
say
much
that
of that?
I'm familiar. Well, even if you look at downtown Lake Oswego, for example, you've got all that commercial development plus banks and restaurants and retail stores and so on and so forth, but they just put in a large, number of apartments. They're not affordable necessarily. Okay, but it's a model that seems to work for that core that they had. And I think that the rub is, can you do that and still keep it affordable for people? I have seen some developments down in Salem that seem to have done that, Like I said, you've got that down, you've got that commercial, but it isn't a big box. They're usually, the smaller folks. Do you know what I mean? So,
I mean, I don't know what the reality of that is either. We have a couple commissioners in the queue. Are you
I'm
done?
sorry, I'm done, and I didn't mean to jump in like that. I was
Commissioner
thinking-
Savas, you're up.
Yeah, I just want to just point out that in my earlier comments with regard to the parking and on this topic here, we're not talking about a area that is heavily residential. We're really talking about that interface. We're really talking about commercial, major arterials in this case, that are commercial, that are employment, that have currently, a lot of these have good paying jobs, not, industrial area as well, but, we're not talking about changing the industrial area. But my point is that, when you look at some of the TOD models that are successful, where you have businesses on the bottom, like 4-on-1s, 3-on-1s, those are where they know they have, or the design of the particular circumstances are such that there's walkability, there's enough housing concentration, and when I look at the one picture that you displayed, staff, in your PowerPoint that showed, looked like about an acre of land with had nothing but housing. There's probably enough customers to make the bottom line work. You need to have enough customer base to make a business whole, to where they can say, hey, nearby, we're going to rely on the local residents nearby to survive. I mean, that's really our customer base. And so they don't need that parking. They don't need some of those amenities as much, because they're not relying on drive-by traffic. But in these commercial corridors, especially when they're shallow, right? We have a lot of shallow on McLaughlin, less so on 82nd Avenue. But you don't really have that depth to really bring in that scale of population that will keep a TOD perhaps model viable. So that's I think it's really a case-by-case scenario, and you have to look at individually. And we're making these high-level changes, wholesale changes on a large geographic scale here, if you looking at the map. So that's my concern. I mean, I know that the market's gonna pencil these things out, and and they're gonna figure out what works or what doesn't work, and make those decisions. But I'm trying to keep all of that in mind. And getting to your first point, Tootie, I do want to point out that the employment aspects of this. We're going to be adding people. We need to be adding jobs, right? And if we're going to be adding jobs and adding people, and in these kind of environments, we're also need to make sure we got a good transportation system. But that doesn't really seem to be, coming to Clackamas County. I use Multnomah County in that business that I talked about, that's moving to Clark County. And that area is surrounded by transit. There's transit going east, there's transit going west, there's everything nearby. And yet there's still these parking situations that he's experiencing. Well, we have less of that in Clackamas County. We have very little transit. And I know that all our light rail stations we're talking about here, frankly, are really the end of the line. They're not connecting to a system that goes east and west very well. So that's why I have a little bit of trepidation, that knowing that, from our conversation with TriMet, that perhaps a lot of that transit and a lot of those ideal amenities, if you will, are not going to come anytime soon. I'm sure developers are going to be pretty savvy about that as well when they do the math on these things and say, do they pencil? So that's really all I had to say. That as I factor all of this, and we'll have another stab at this after the Planning Commission's done, and there'll be a great discussion. But I'm looking forward to seeing the comments, and maybe we can all share examples of locations to go look at in the region where we think it works great, and where we think it's obviously maybe not working so great. And because I'm going to be very open-minded about this. We're not really making a call until This hits us after the Planning Commission, but I do want to keep an open mind, but I certainly want to see examples of success.
Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, our goal is to build affordable housing. And what's before us is an idea for doing that. It's an option, is one of the things we can do to actually make things happen. The idea of commercial space below, apartments above, works many places. They're doing it in Gresham, for example. And Commissioner Savas is right. To make those shops on the first floor viable, you do need a higher population as a rule. But this increasing the units per acre from 25 to 60 is also a step in the right direction to make things more affordable. And if we don't do it here, where do we do it? And look, we got 4 years to build 1,500 units. I'm saying your three ideas here are all good.
Thank you, Commissioner Scholl. Any other commissioner wishes to weigh in on this particular conversation?
Chair, I got a question for maybe Gary or Dan maybe, and that is to Commissioner Scholl's point. Gary, if a private developer comes in on their own and builds a 4-on-1 housing facility, does not use tax credits, and let's say they build 100 units, and they're not associated with the county per se, other than using obviously permitting and planning department and everything else. Do those 100 units count for our goal that we've set upon staff and ourselves for those units that Mr. Scholl pointed to? Or are the housing units we're talking about ones that we build that are actually affordable housing units? I'm just trying to make sure that if the private sector, independently of us, builds 100 affordable units, that really counts against our goal.
Commissioner Savas, this is Dan Johnson. When that goal was developed, there was a specific dialogue around how many of those units fell into the public subsidized housing component and how many fell into kind of our work around either for-profit or private development. And essentially there was a split of 700 and 800. I can't remember, I believe the 800 went with H3S in regards to those that were publicly subsidized. And the 700 fell into our realm in a desire to revise our code to allow the market to develop what the market could develop. And that's where you see these changes coming forward. And so, yes, they would count in that goal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think you can take this to the Planning Commission, see what they say, what they want to do.
You guys will get enough chance to look at it, and we'll talk more with you about it.
Yeah, I don't know, our Planning Commission folks are pretty darn smart.
Yep. So on that note, next slide, please, just real quick, just so the board knows.
Yeah, the last
schedule.
slide.
Next one, there we go. So that's basically the schedule we're looking at going forward with. As you are very well aware, we'll be back in front of you having a discussion, and we will share with the Planning Commission all the comments, questions, and concerns you had today. So thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Oh,
Clarify.
Commissioner Scholl.
Could you clarify? You're going to do option 2 less paragraph 2D.
That is the
correct?
direction we received.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gary, what's up?
That's the end of policy sessions. Back to the issues list is Commissioner Communications.
Okay, Commissioner Communications. Who wants to go first?
Start real quick. I just got back from, the Association of Oregon Counties meeting at Sun River, and it was great to see everybody. I know Commissioner Scholl was there, and Commissioner Fisher was there. It was really good. I was pleasantly surprised that the AOC has appointed me to be on the National Association Board again with past President Jim Doherty.
Mask.
So, yeah, I got to put my mask on. Sorry. Okay. All right, that's better. Thank you, Gary. So that was really a nice surprise. So I look forward to doing that. And also the National Association I'm on the International Trade Committee, and I'm vice chair of that committee, one of the vice chairs, so I've been asked to help facilitate a conversation.
Great.
And a breakout session. So I'm looking forward to that, and I think it'll be a really fruitful session when we go to Maryland for the first time since March of 2019, that we can all get together at the national level as well. So.
Good, tip your toe in the Atlantic Ocean for me.
Oh, I will. Oh,
Righty.
yeah. Okay.
Anything else, Commissioner Schrader?
No, that's it for now.
Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, I just have one thing. A reminder for the people of Clackamas County that your Fair and Rodeo Board said go on planning for your rodeo and fair this year. It's the third week of August, and I would invite every family in Clackamas County to put that on your schedule. Get your family to the fair, go see the rodeo, get the kids some cotton candy, go see the chickens, and have a good time at Clackamas County Fair.
Thank you, Commissioner Scholl. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, I missed the earlier session. I apologize for that this morning, so I don't know what was discussed, but I did want to just talk to you about, or just speak to the conversation around our Thursday night meeting with regard to YouTube pulling that. And, we know that we got that back up. I want to thank staff for getting that video back up so that people can watch the meeting. But I guess it does speak to, information or misinformation. I know in our guidelines, we want to make sure we clarify. I mean, we obligate ourselves to clarify misinformation. And there was such a high volume of that misinformation Thursday night. And of course, we shouldn't be interrupting people. So I'm not encouraging anyone to interrupt anyone in their public testimony. Let them complete that. But you find yourselves torn by a group of people, some of that perhaps of issues or challenges of compliance with the meeting rules or behavior or decorum, and try to couple that with not trying to exacerbate or worsen any particular scenario at the time. So, but I thought it was very troubling to hear some of that and not have the ability or to clarify a number of the statements that are made. I'm not a scientist, and none of us are scientists to talk about some of the things that were raised, but it just bothers me a little bit that the decorum and the nature and the anxiety that I felt from those people speaking was a little, and we're adults, but it was a little bit strong. And I think we need to, when people start insulting other people and the room itself puts people at risk, that is something that when we're running the meetings, it's bothersome. So Chair, I was glad to hear this morning that there's discussions about helping with that with regard to how the room's controlled and so forth, and that we can help provide us some tools that help that. I do want to just say that the security in the building is something I've raised for several years, because at times, we've had some visitors come by, whether they had a mental health issue or whatnot, that provided or basically a dangerous situation for all. And we don't want anyone to be hurt. And we want people to feel comfortable, but I don't, I certainly struggled Thursday evening with trying to, maintain order and not let it exacerbate or get, or worsen. So very difficult. And again, I think that the YouTube situation just seemed to be kind of capped off that whole topic there a little bit. Granted, there were a number of other issues that came up that were worth discussion. I don't want to dismiss that it's not just a one topic issue that was there, but I just hope that people can realize that going forward with all this tension that we have, tension with COVID and tension with race, or tension with about their political beliefs and tension about the impacts of the firestorm and everything that's, or housing and the homeless. There's a lot of pressure on everyone. Airlines are trying to maintain civility on their flights. We've got just a lot of people that are on the edge. And I just hope that people and we could convey some kind of calmness and control and order and let people know that they are being heard. I think when people feel they're not being heard, that just ramps up their anxiety. And so I just want to just convey that, we can work with staff on making sure that everything's secure. We'll be out of our mask requirements here pretty soon, ideally, so that won't be a topic. But I think it's important to make sure that we don't exacerbate some of the anxieties that are out there, related or unrelated to the topic at hand. That's all I have for today.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. Yesterday, I reached out to the Metro councilors regarding the budget note on the supported housing homeless services measure, and I received 3 calls back, and I appreciate being able to talk to the Metro councilors about Clackamas County's values regarding keeping the ballot language at the forefront of expectations of performance for not only my county, the 2 other counties, but Metro as well. I think the tri-counties are united in their efforts to make sure that the ballot language that the voters approved of is supported and maintained and honored, whereas Clackamas County did not vote in favor of this. We are nevertheless tethered by the vote of the other 2 counties. So that is the hand that we have been dealt. So we will have to play it to our best ability and keeping our values and priorities at the forefront. I had a call from the governor this morning wanting to know how she can help us in raising our vaccination rate. And I thanked her for the call. I thanked her for her outreach. And I said I thought when she raised the vaccination rates to 70% and then said that restrictions would be lifted, I thought that that gave motivation to the population, because it was obvious it did, to get vaccinated. I also asked her about supplying information about your vaccine to enter businesses or schools after 70% is achieved. She said that would go away. She assured me that is gone. Then I also pressed her a little bit more in saying, will you go out and say that? We talked about schools, talked about universities. She did say private universities can do what they want. But I think the theory has been established that vaccinations, at least for a majority of the people, because this county is at 65% vax rates, could be a good thing, although I still maintain it's a choice. She did express concern about schools next fall. Kids go to school, and 3 weeks later they all come home sick. That's just the reality of kids being next to each other with snotty noses and not always washing hands. I mean, it happens. And I assume it's going to happen for schools. Do we want to shut down our schools? No, we do not want to shut down our schools. And I hope we don't have a knee-jerk overreaction to an outbreak in schools over this virus or any other virus. And so she asked what we could do to increase vax rates from children 12 years old to 17. I says, well, I don't know. I said I would meet with our public health director and our EOC director, and we would put together a plan and get back to her. And she had some suggestions, which I have already relayed to some of our staff people, and we'll see how that goes. And so I will report back to her once those recommendations are being made. And regarding last Thursday's business meeting, I was not present. I had a family health emergency to attend to, but I do appreciate Commissioner Savas chairing that in most difficult times. Being a chair in situations like that is not easy. And it's very difficult because most of the time you are struck by surprise. If everything was planned and methodical, it would be no problem being a chair, but it rarely is when involving public and what happened in this meeting. Tomorrow's meeting will be long, so anybody listening to this know that we have budget considerations. That is our first duty, as prescribed in law, that we will balance a budget every fiscal year. And that was our first and foremost duty for tomorrow. I don't know how long it will go. I'm putting out ahead of time. I could limit testimony from 3 minutes to 2 minutes to 1 minute, depending on the amount of people in the room and the wherewithal. And I will take the temperature every minute. We have put safety protocols in place, and those will be adhered to by every single person who shows up. And I'm saying to the public, if you happen to be listening, we welcome your opinions. We want to hear from you very much because you are very important to our governance. But please keep in mind that we are all human beings. We deserve to be treated with respect, and we do not catcall, we do not call names, but we can engage in a discourse of opinion at these meetings. And with that in mind, we are adjourned for today. Thank you very much.